If you've ever struggled with getting fur to look soft and realistic rather than flat and lifeless, you're not alone. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how I paint fur in a way that is simple, satisfying, and works with both oils and acrylics. If you're trying to get better at painting realistic wildlife and pets, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Danny, and I'm here to make it feel doable. I run the Wildlife Painting Academy, where over 1,300 students have learned to paint wildlife that actually looks real. By the way, if you want this lesson on how to paint fur to really sink in, you should grab my free guide, The Fur Fix. It breaks down 5 keys to painting more realistic animal fur. There's a link below. So for this painting demo, I knew I wanted to choose a reference photo that has some really gorgeous flow and fur going in different directions just to make things a little bit more interesting. And this bit of wolf fur totally fit the bill. I've included a link to the photo in the description of this video if you want to follow along. I'm going to be working with oil paint today like usual, but you can definitely get the same effect with acrylics as well. Though I do recommend adding a slow drying medium to your arsenal, otherwise blending can get a little bit tricky. All right, so let's take a peek at our supplies. For paint colors, I'm going to be using Ivory Black, Titanium White, Burnt Umber, and a little bit of Burnt Sienna and Cobalt Violet hue for glazing. For my oil painting medium, I will be using Galkyd Gel by the brand Gamblin. This is my current favorite. Plus, I'm going to be using this as my glazing medium in the later phases as well. As for brushes, I'm going to be using a couple of different Filbert brushes and round brushes in different sizes. So I start off by doing a rough sketch of where the different sections of fur will go on my canvas. And since I don't like working on white canvas, I'm going to be starting off by tinting that canvas surface with brown acrylic paint. It is so much easier to work with that brown surface than white, and I find that it gives the painting a really beautiful natural warmth to it. Let's get our palette ready for painting. I'm going to plop a couple blobs of your paint down, and now I'm going to pre-mix a few different tones of brown so that I've got some colors that are easy to grab from once I actually start painting my fur. Now that phase 1, paint mixing and prep, is out of the way, let's get painting. I always like to start my underpainting by blocking in the darkest parts of my painting first, using a nice large brush. Then I like to move through the different lighter colors. I'm not really focusing on detail at all at this phase, just values and building the overall structure of the painting. Don't overthink your colors at this phase. Fur is all about values and layering, not matching that exact shade perfectly from the start. Once we hit our glazing phase, you can completely transform your painting and bring in all of those amazing colors into that fur. So when you're painting animals, you always want to make sure that you are keeping a close eye on your reference photo. So here, because we're painting fur, I'm always asking myself, what direction does the fur flow in? What is the texture of the fur? What is the length of the fur? And making sure that I am using all of those different questions to build up realistic fur that is following that reference photo. So as you can see here, this underpainting is looking kind of insane, kind of crazy. Super rough, there's no detail, it's a little questionable at this phase, but that is one of those things where you just have to trust the process and know that the next phase, the blending phase, is going to make such a difference and it's going to completely transform it. And then I'm going to be grabbing a nice soft dry brush and I'm going to be blending out that rough underpainting to create the prettiest, softest base for our fur. This is very easily done with oils as they take a long time to dry, but if you're working with acrylics, you might want to use a slow drying medium and work in smaller sections so the paint doesn't dry before you actually have a chance to blend it. So I put my painting aside for a few days to let that beautiful underpainting dry completely, and now I'm going in and starting to build up all of that gorgeous detail that I've just been craving. I'm again starting with my darkest colors first, still working with a fairly large Filbert brush here, but I'm using that knife edge of the brush to kind of get into some tighter areas, But basically, I'm working through my painting here using tiny little brush strokes to build up the layers of that fur detail. One of the tricks to painting realistic fur is to remember that nature is chaos, right? And basically, we want to be reflecting that when we are creating this fur. We don't want it to look super orderly and neat and tidy, like this wolf just ran a brush through its fur, because that's not realistic. And if you paint that fur perfectly orderly and smooth and all of the hairs are perfectly lined up, something's just going to seem a little off. Your viewer might not be able to completely recognize it, but something feels a little strange. So one of the ways that you can make sure that you are nailing that realistic fur is to embrace the chaos a little bit. And you're going to be adding in hairs that are going in different directions, letting your brushstrokes get a little crazy, having fun with it. And that's actually going to do wonders for building up a lot of realism. So as I'm kind of done doing the darkest parts, now I'm going to be starting to move into some lighter paint. So still using medium-ish, smallish Filbert brush here, starting to build up a little bit more detail now with my lighter paint. So if you struggle to get those nice flowing lines when you're building up your detail, and instead you're kind of getting some rough, choppy lines in your brush strokes, one of the things I can recommend is to thin out your paint a little bit. So if you're using oils, rather than thinning out your paint with more medium, try thinning out your paint with a little bit more paint thinner. It's going to give it a little bit more of a watery consistency, and you're going to have lines that are flowing beautifully. If you're working with acrylics, thin the paint out with a little bit more water. So this detail phase is the fun but lengthy part of the process here. You've got all of these tiny little lines that you're building into your painting, so it's just time to put some good music on, grab a couple of tasty drinks and snacks, and just dig in. So I tend to use my smallest brushes when I'm working my details only when I'm going through with my lightest paint here. Because for me personally, I don't like to go hyper detailed with my entire painting. I like to keep that tight detail in strategic areas. So it's going to attract the eye of the viewer, but it's going to give them some rest once you actually have less detail in certain areas. So, because I do find that when an entire painting is hyper detailed, it can be a lot for the viewer. And I personally find that keeping that detail to more strategic areas, the important parts of the painting that you want people to look at first, is a great way to not only cut down on the amount of time that you spend detailing, but overall it makes for a stronger painting. In this detail phase, this is when it's extra important that you are adding a little bit of that natural chaos to those brush strokes, letting a couple of rogue hairs get in there that are pointing in a different direction, that are, making things a little chaotic. Those are good because they add some really beautiful natural realism to your fur. Okay, detail layer is done. The next phase is going to be glazing. And in order to get to this phase, our painting needs to be 100% dry. No cheating here, 100% dry. So I'm gonna go put my painting aside for a few days, and then I will see you in the glazing phase. Okay, so now let's start glazing. Basically what we're doing here is we are adding a tiny amount of transparent pigment from certain paints into our glazing medium. So here I'm still using Galkyd Gel by the brand Gamblin for my glazing medium, putting a little blob down here on my palette, and then I am going to be mixing different glazes with my transparent paint that I'm using to get different effects. The first bit of glaze that I'm going to be mixing here is what I like to call my shadow glaze. So here I'm adding a little bit of Ivory Black, I'm adding a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm adding a little bit of my cobalt violet hue, which is a nice purple. And this is what I'm going to be using to deepen some of the shadows while still adding a really beautiful sort of richness. I love adding cobalt violet hue for this because it adds a little something. And the second glaze that I'm going to be mixing up here is going to be a really beautiful rusty warmth color here. This is going to be using burnt sienna, and it is one of my favorite glazes ever. It just adds such gorgeous color to fur. So now that our painting is completely dry, it's time to add that glaze. I'm using a large brush, picking up that glaze and starting to apply it to my painting. And immediately you can see how it absolutely transforms the color without covering any of your hard work below. The ear of this wolf has some really beautiful warmth happening here, and there's some of the fur around it as well. So we hadn't really covered color yet, but you can see with this glaze how easy it is to add that color after the fact. And we're not compromising any of that beautiful detail we built up. This is why I absolutely love glazing, because you can spend so much time and effort building a really strong painting by focusing on values and texture and form, and then adding color later once you have that solid, strong painting in place. So once I was happy with the kind of rusty color that I was adding here, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my shadow glaze. And I'm using this to deepen some of the shadows and add a little bit of color to those shadows as well. So remember that our shadow glaze has a little bit of our burnt umber, which is a nice brown, and also has some of that cobalt violet hue in it, which is going to contrast nicely against that warm rusty color we just added to the fur and just give those shadows a beautiful depth. So once I'm happy with how my glaze is looking, the shadows are all deepened and beautiful, got some beautiful colors that I worked into that fur. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a few more strategic details and highlights in a couple of places. If this kind of painting is something that you'd love to learn more about, that is exactly what I teach inside the Wildlife Painting Academy. It's my online membership for beginner and intermediate artists who want to start painting animals in oil paint without the overwhelm. I've had over 1,300 students go through my lessons, and it's built around a simple 4-step strategy that makes every new painting feel doable, even if you've never painted that animal before. You can check it out in the link below if you're curious. Well, that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I think this fur turned out great. I love the colors, plus adding that color was super easy. Got a lovely blend of really intense detail in certain areas, and then other areas that feel much more softer and less in focus. Overall, I'm absolutely thrilled with the way this fur looks. And hopefully, if you painted along, you also are happy with your fur and you've learned a couple things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.